I really think that there should be a segment in all 200-hour Yoga Alliance trainings about trauma. It should just be part of don't move your knee in front of your foot. Here's how you deal with the autonomic nervous system. It's basic to the human body. It's not a special thing. I understand what people mean when they say we can't be trained in everything, but I think that's because they don't realize that we're really talking about the basic physiology of every human being.
You're listening to episode 3 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. This week, I'm excited to share with you an interview with Margaret Howard. Margaret is a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Missouri. She practices social work and psychotherapy. She has a Master of Fine Arts and a degree in poetry, and she likes organic gardening. She's a musician, a yogi, writer, dog lover, mother, and grandmother. And there's a fun story that in a previous job, Margaret was a writer of pilot manuals for the U.S. Army. I first got to know of Margaret by reading an article in the HuffPost titled, "Why Trauma Training Should Be Mandatory for Yoga Teachers." This sparked a conversation with my own local yoga teacher group, and I was really excited when I got to her website and her tagline said, "Welcome home, you sweet, unconventional you." So I reached out and asked Margaret if she would do an interview for our Connected Yoga Teacher group. There's lots of information to take in from this. I have done my best to try and compile all of the links and notes, and that's available on our website, theconnectedyogateacher.com. So enjoy. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm very happy to be here talking to you.
All right. Is there anything else that you would like to add that is kind of who you are today or right now?
I think you covered the last 20 or 30 years right there. The only thing I'd add, I don't remember if you said it, is that I'm also a grandmother of 4, which is a big, happy part of my life right now.
That's exciting. Okay, so if you're okay with it, we'll dive right into just talking about why trauma training should be mandatory for yoga teachers and what that kind of looks like in your ideal world.
I first started thinking about why trauma training should be mandatory for yoga teachers when I read David Emerson and Elizabeth Hopper's book, Overcoming Trauma Through Yoga. And as I was thinking through this as a trauma survivor myself, and also at that time I was in graduate school working on my master's in social work and going to yoga class. And just as this was forming in my mind and I was trying to apply what Emerson and Hopper were saying to my own experience, I was in a yoga class with someone that I really loved and respected a lot, very well-trained yoga teacher, far beyond the 200-hour standard training. We were intrigued, and it felt most comfortable at that moment for me to have my foot, actually it was my right foot up on my left thigh, fairly far up, and I felt very balanced and comfortable right in that moment. And she asked me to put my foot on my ankle, and I said, I don't really want to right now. I'm very comfortable right here. And she asked me to let go of ego and put my foot on my ankle. And I tried it. So in order to not draw more attention to me, I did that. I put my foot on my ankle, and I almost immediately, I had to stop. I didn't know why at the moment, but I had to stop, and I sat down and started crying. And then after class, we tried to talk about it. I found that I didn't think she understood what I was saying. I didn't really know what I was saying at that moment either. And then I went home, and some short period of time later, that whole article series just flowed out of me. So what I understand now that happened was, even though I didn't think of it at the time, it wasn't in my mind cognitively, I had actually broken that spot in my ankle when I was 11 years old. And I think that I suspect what happened was that for some reason or another, the part in my body, my left ankle was a little activated at that time. Maybe there was a storm coming because it aches when storms come. I don't know. There's no way to know all the factors that can go into what the body is perceiving in any given moment, that the cognitive, the very small part of ourselves, which is our cognitive intellect, might not have access to or understand. But I just couldn't do that at that moment. For some reason, there was a lot of sensitivity there. And when I did do it, though, when I followed her instruction and did put my foot there, overwhelming emotion emerged. There was, of course, overwhelming emotion connected to me breaking my leg when I was 11 for various reasons, nothing horrible or that most people would even maybe think of as traumatic. But any kind of physical injury, it turns out, can be traumatic, and we hold it in our bodies for a long time. So then I began looking around at other yoga classes and talking to people, and decided it was just time that there's something that simple could cause that kind of a response and cause a yoga teacher to really shut a student down, then something needed to change.
Right.
That's why I wrote the article. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing your story. That really brings it to a personal level of how that, like you said, that trauma is held in the body. And I like how you said that the cognitive is such a small part, and then we don't always know. Like, how long ago was this that it happened?
I'm pretty sure it was still in grad school, or else I had just graduated. So it would have been sometime between 2009 and 2011.
Okay. But you had training and you had worked through your social work training, or you were in it?
I was toward the end of it by that time, if I hadn't already graduated. Right. But I was continuing to study trauma in the body. So my social work training, even though I went to a very highly ranked social work school, we weren't really taught anything about trauma per se.
Right.
Except as it came up in cognitive behavioral therapy class, dialectical behavioral therapy class. There were a couple of other mentions of it, but the school is very conventional and behind the curve, it turns out. It's a wonderful school. I still love my school, but they're very cautious, and actually it doesn't make all that much sense because there's a lot of research that's been completed and is still ongoing at research institutions that look at neurobiology of trauma. And that's really where all of this that I'm talking about comes out of, is that kind of research. So I was continuing my studies on my own in trauma in the body at that time too, really both so that I could learn how to actually help people heal, and so that I could heal myself.
Right. So teacher training is 200 hours. If you had to just tell them the basics of it today in our call, what could they look into more? I'm really touched by your words when you say yoga teachers may be unintentionally doing harm. And I know yoga teachers, and you've gone to yoga class yourself, and that's not what they want to be doing. So how can they not be doing that?
A couple of things to start out with. I think the very first one is to just be open to switching perspective a little bit. And maybe in shifting perspective, step over to a place where you could look out at the world and understand that practically everybody has some trauma. Right. We live in a traumatizing world. Let go of the idea that traumatized people are some kind of a special population, because that's just not the truth. I mean, as a psychotherapist, I even see very severe post-trauma reactions in people who've had fender-bender car accidents, who've had any kind of invasive medical procedure, even sometimes dental procedures. And these can be, these are common ones, even like colonoscopy or having a leg set, having a surgery, some kind of a shot. Childbirth can be actually traumatic, even though it can also be wonderful, and it can be both at the same time. So we're not just talking about, for instance, rape survivors or trafficking survivors or kidnapping or abuse survivors, although it's very important also to understand that people who've gone through such things can be right in your class and you would never know.
Right.
So that's the first thing, just understanding that every yoga teacher has people with trauma in their class. And then from that perspective, there are some simple things that can be done, or some not very expensive or terribly time-consuming things that can be done right away. One of those is to first initiate the practice of always listening to the student. For instance, if you as a yoga teacher see a student modifying a pose, or perhaps even doing an entirely different pose, don't even mention it. Let that person follow their body unless something so unsafe is going on physically, right? That you just have to be like, I'm sorry, you might break your leg if you continue to do that, right? Like something that, especially stuff involving the neck. I think most yoga teachers know what those things are. So unless it's an immediate safety issue, let the student follow the wisdom of their own body and just trust that that's what they need to do in that moment. Never call attention, never call somebody out in front of other people. Trauma survivors can very often experience intense feelings of shame when attention is brought to them, especially in front of other people, but sometimes even if it's just one-on-one. And shame is a physiological feeling. It's physical. It's not a mindset. It's a sensation in the body that is probably involved with the dorsal vagal nerve. So very specific. And that sensation of shame can be present even if the traumatic event for that person that they might be re-experiencing in a moment or in danger of re-experiencing is something like a fender bender car wreck.
Right. Okay. That's very helpful.
The second thing is I would just immediately buy David Emerson and Elizabeth Hopper's Overcoming Trauma Through Yoga book, which is an easy read. It's not very long. It has for the student and for the teacher sections, and you could read both of those. So that would be like very, very useful right away, not an expensive book. And then another one, this is probably a little bit controversial, and I'd love to know what people are saying about, any of these ideas. So the third thing would be, until getting more training, institute a no-touch policy. And of course, sometimes maybe if someone asks or if it's necessary for physical safety, then touch can be a good idea. But the thing is, here's a little tricky thing about touch. So a lot of people say, well, I always ask a student before I touch them if it's okay to touch them. But if a person is a little bit dissociated, then they may not be really able to respond, but more, in a way that is honoring of their own need in the moment. But even more importantly, trauma survivors, especially any kind of assault survivor, will maybe almost automatically say yes, because that was a survival technique. I mean, a lot of times people end up, we've said yeah, we've not fought or consented to, not consented, I want to take that word back, it's certainly not the right word, but we've, during a body invasion, sometimes the only way to survive is to not say no. Even though you might be saying no, you might be saying no, or you might be saying no with all your body language and everything else. But really, what happens is that the system takes over to try to keep the organism alive. That's what happens with mammals, and humans are mammals. Mm-hmm. So during an assault or even a near assault, or even some kinds of moments of coercion, whether a person was able to get away or not, part of us just shuts down in order to survive. And so if someone, especially someone that we don't have a long established relationship of trust with, approaches in an intimate moment, which actually I do believe a yoga class can be, because we're all purposely in our bodies and paying attention in a slow, sustained way, the capacity to say no can fleetingly leave when someone asks to touch us.
Right.
And I find even right now, as I try to talk about this, and I think that's why I said the word that I didn't even want to say at all, I find I can tell, because I'm tuned into my body as I'm talking, I was even dissociating a little bit as I tried to talk about it.
Okay.
So, yeah, so that means that I was losing a little bit of capacity to my verbal and cognitive brain as my nervous system became activated. That's like a totally normal thing that happens with trauma survivors, and really illustrative of what I'm trying to say about touch.
Right.
I know some people are using those little yes and no flip coin things, you know, that, yeah. And a lot of people in trauma, and some survivors are saying that that's cool with it. Like they're happy to use the little yes or no, that you can just keep on your mat and turn it over if you're okay to be touched, turn it the other way if you're not okay to be touched. One of my reservations about that is that, well, I would want to make sure that you can't see from far away, because...
So that other people can't see.
Well, yeah, and we tend to, I know most of the time when people going into a yoga class are like, okay, so I'm here to be open-hearted and receptive and willing to encounter my most genuine self. And then if we find a part of us wanting to close down or wanting to protect ourselves even, we can second guess that, especially if the teacher is saying things with good intention that might cause someone to feel shame for feeling like protecting themselves, such as one we hear about a lot is, what if you right now intentionally step into your worst fear?
Right. When a teacher invites that in. Right.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds really great if your worst fear is, you know, public speaking. But if your worst fear is your abuser coming back or dying in a car wreck, which you almost did 2 years ago, then no, you don't want to ask somebody to step back into that.
That is great insight. Yeah.
And a couple of other things. There's a no-touch policy. However, if someone goes to the David Emerson's training, which is through the Justice Resource Institute in Boston, although they travel around, he and his colleagues travel around, as I understand it, to do these trainings, then there may or may not be, I mean, I think that he generally is about a no-touch policy too, but you can learn a lot more detail about what that means. And then somatic experiencing training has is welcoming to yoga teachers, massage therapists, psychotherapists, all kinds of body workers too, not just psychotherapists. And they spend at least a whole year, sometimes I think maybe two, instructing in the proper use of touch, how to use touch to heal trauma rather than drive it further in. Right. Yeah, rather than triggering it.
Okay, those are great. I will make sure to find, or if you want to send me those links, I can put them on this with this post of the book.
Sure. I'd be happy to.
Oh, I know what I wanted to ask you. How important do you think it is to have trauma on the intake form? You know, people are checking off, have you had, you know, any knee issues, or I know we have at our studio anxiety and depression. And how important is it, do you think, to have trauma on that?
That's such a complex question that seems so simple, you know, and I don't think I haven't come to a real firm position on that, I guess, or maybe I keep changing it. So here's why it's tricky. For one thing, we find that a lot of people who have had traumatic experiences don't know that they've had traumatic experiences. What people think of as trauma is usually the big ones that commonly are thought of, rape, kidnapping, war. A lot of times they aren't counting their car wrecks or their separation from their mother when they were one because you had to go in the hospital, or the death of a sibling, or the fender bender, right? Or even maybe listening to having a job where you're helping people with their traumas can also cause secondary trauma. So I don't know if you learn anything with that.
Okay.
I would think that, it's going to be not a very high number. The numbers aren't going to match up. How many people say yes and how many people actually have had trauma that they haven't identified as such.
Right. And as you said, if teachers go from the point of view of everyone in my class is coming in with some sort of trauma, whether they know it or not, maybe that's more useful than having it on the intake form.
I mean, I really think so. I think we just assume and just go for really, there's a way that I think that this is really just another level of basic human sensitivity, right? If we stop thinking of trauma as this sort of, big special event that only certain people have had, and so those people are a population, and really begin to just recognize that life is in fact traumatic. Even Facebook is. Sometimes I'm laughing, but it's true. Sometimes the images will go by. They're just I really wish I had not seen that. Yes. Of hurt children or something, or animals. Yeah, and even there's also pervasive trauma, which is just kind of the hammering stress of everyday life, the trauma of poverty, of violence in the world. These are pervasive. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's far better just to assume that we all have some level of trauma and begin to learn ways to be very sensitive to people in general, without preconceptions and without agendas, right? Such as everyone must have their heart open all the time.
Right.
In fact, we need to develop ways to know when we want to be vulnerable and when we don't want to be vulnerable. And we all need to respect each other's wishes and boundaries on that.
So that raises a really good point there, that someone who is in trauma can't, it is not healthy or helpful to open them more to that. So Could you speak on kind of two things? One, what a teacher might see when someone is experiencing a trigger response in their class, and then two, what they should or should not do.
Yes. So what a teacher would see can go over a huge range of apparent responses. And of course, reading the Emerson or taking any of these trainings can help with that. So on one end of the spectrum, you're going to see everything from a kind of freeze or spaciness, which is, mild dissociation, collapse on the one side. So there's kind of a down regulation that can happen when someone is triggered. And then there's an up regulation on the other side, which can be flushing, sweating, dry mouth, or even walking out of the room, which brings up another important point. It's absolutely vital that everyone be able to walk out of the room when they need to walk out of the room, or even leave without ever being called on it. So there's the first thing, understanding that there can be sympathetic arousal, and that also comes with elevated heart rate, shallower breathing, etc. Right? If someone's able to tune into those things. And then on the other side, the dorsal vagal collapse or dissociation. And that can look really mild. You might not even notice it until you're really looking. And this can look like compliance. So if a teacher goes up to touch someone and that person dissociates from touch or even the approach or possibility of touch, then the teacher has to be very aware of what's going on in order to see that, which again can look like spaciness or even freeze. And right there we have exactly why someone might not be able to say no.
Okay.
Because they might be in that state right there. Again, which is a leftover survival mechanism, not cognitive.
Mm-hmm. So take, for instance, your example. So I am pretty comfortable crying on my yoga mat over the years, whether it's in my home or in a class. And I know some of it, I know where it comes from. Some of it I don't. But you said, that was, you know that it was trauma triggering. Mm-hmm. And I've also had those experiences. So what would be not helpful and what would be helpful for a teacher to do in that moment?
I think this is such a complex point, and it can be so varied, or so, like, there are so many possibilities depending on the person and the situation. Number one, it's paramount not to call attention to that student in any way.
Okay.
In front of everyone else. Now, let's say for the sake of this question, right now, we're within the frame of physical safety. Right? So this is, if someone is triggered, they're not doing anything that would be, dangerous to themselves or anyone else. So what you want to do, really the main goal, if someone is triggered, is to gently and without calling attention to them, help them come back into what we call the window of tolerance, which is right there in the middle where we're neither overactivated nor underactivated. And how to do that, if I were a teacher in that situation, the first thing I would do is think back a couple steps. What did I just say or what did I just do that might have been inadvertently been triggering to that person? I'm going to not do more of that right now. The second thing I would do is try to notice, without asking, did I see what position or what pose that person was in when that triggering thing happened? And I would try to observe to see if they're frozen. If it looks like they've been able to move, and actually crying is a little bit even better, if you will, than being frozen or collapsed or being overactivated, like flushing or rapid breathing or something like that. Because crying can be the release part. So there can be other stuff going on in there too. But I would probably, with someone who's crying, I would check out what's the context. What did I just say? What did I just do? And also knowing that maybe it was just that position and that flow through the chakras right there that may have touched something in that person. And most of the time, I would just not do anything at all.
Okay.
Except ease up on the gas a little bit, Look at what happened. Let that person have their moment without even calling attention to it in any way. But crying is a lot different, though, most of the time, than the freeze, collapse, or overactivation, unless it's accompanied by some of those other indications, right?
So some of our teachers listening might be feeling just an overwhelming sense of like, oh my gosh, I would need to be trained. And as you said, you were trained as a social worker, you work as a psychotherapist now, and you still took extra training into trauma.
Yeah.
I think a big part of that is to also give teachers the real tools of referring people.
Yes.
Which I do. If I see something come up and I feel it's very much out of my scope, which, someone could come to me and say, I have a herniated disc, and I refer them, check with your doctor, or I want to make really sure what they can and cannot do in my yoga class and let them know kind of my boundary as a teacher. And do you think it's the same way with trauma?
Yeah, I would have around a list of trauma therapists or trauma sensitive and informed therapists that you trust, right? I would ask around, and it would be, I would try to know something about those people first, though. There are a lot of therapists. Not all therapists are trauma trained, just as not all yoga teachers are trauma trained, right? So It's not just yoga teachers. I mean, it's really so many professions, even medical professions, that still need to have trauma training. With the caveat that it can feel really shaming to someone if we come up to them after we see them cry and say, "Oh, it looks like you need mental health treatment. Here's a name." Right. When we want to do that, I would maybe have, some materials around, like cards or some flyers, and try to find a way. If someone asks for a referral, I would definitely have referrals on hand.
Great.
Or
point.
If they bring it up.
Yes, great. Yeah. Point. And that is often, as a teacher, I find that it'll be after class or in a quick email that students will reach out to me and say, I'm really struggling.
Yeah.
And then that's when I offer, okay, here are some people that I know and trust, or I have students who have told me they know and trust them.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And also, you could, in that email, like I keep a couple of standard email texts around that I can use for referrals, and just copy paste. So that I already have them sort of formatted in a way that I think is as trauma sensitive as I can imagine. And in that, I have a couple of websites, a couple of books, a couple of names.
That's amazing.
Right. So it's not immediately like I'm just saying, "Oh, here, you need treatment." I mean, hopefully one day we'll get to a place where the stigma against mental health treatment has dissolved away to nothing, and we can all just recommend therapy without anyone being, feeling like somehow that might be insulting or something. But as long as there's some stigma attached, unfortunately, I think it's a good idea to do that. Just put it in the context of some other things. Here's some resources.
Okay. If you have anything that you would like to share as well in terms of that, of how your wording is, I would be up for that as well.
Okay. Nice.
And finally, I guess I just want to touch on how you really say in your article, here's the hope. And you talk about a couple of studies. One is that symptoms of PTSD are decreased with yoga, and also how yoga, there are studies saying that it may reverse damage to the brain and the nervous system caused by trauma. And so if you maybe want to wrap up with how yoga helps people who are dealing with trauma.
Yeah, I think, that's one reason why this subject that you're bringing up here, Shannon, is so important, because yoga teachers are actually right at the front, carrying the torch, right there in the capacity and ability to help so many people heal from the trauma of this world, and even to keep the nervous system flexible and functional enough to help people do that, so that as we encounter traumas in our everyday life and even like larger events, we're able to heal from them faster because of our yoga practice. That appears to happen through the mind-body connection. So somehow in Western culture, we learn to separate the cognition from our experience in the body. And many of us, even to separate from our bodies. Even in yoga class, we might be going through poses, but not feeling the subtleties of what we think of as the emotional body, but is actually the nervous system responding. So it looks like from these studies, and some of them have been actually the Emerson and Bessel van der Kolk are some of those leading the way with that. It appears to build tone and regulation in the nervous system in a way that just talk therapy, even more than talk therapy, like outcomes that are better than just talk therapy. So there you go. We're right on the vanguard and can bring healing into the world just with really a little bit of training and education on what is the context of a yoga class to heal. Oh, and I also wanted to add one thing, if I could, to the what to do if someone is having, if it looks like someone is having a response in yoga class. And I said I wouldn't, necessarily say anything, but you can hold space for that person.
Okay.
And I think this is a really important skill. There has been some stuff written about it, that if you can just hold that person in your heart while you see them crying, then I really think that there's a level on which that's very, very helpful. And the same thing if someone doesn't want to do a pose or is having looks frozen or a little bit overactivated, then as you work through what to do to help them, just know that holding space for them is very powerful, and as is compassion.
Right. So holding space for them is doing something. It's not that you're doing nothing.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah. It's a very different thing than withdrawing because you think it's outside of your area of expertise.
Right. Thank you for that. That's a great add.
You're welcome.
This has been very eye-opening for me, and I really appreciate your time and your sharing of your own personal stories, and then your willingness to share what you think would be very helpful for teachers. So thank you for that.
You're welcome, Shannon. It's been lovely to talk with you. Thank you for caring about this subject.
So that wraps up episode 3, Connected Yoga Teachers. I want to extend a huge thank you to Margaret for this interview. She answered my many questions with such knowledge, grace, and compassion. She has given me a lot to think on and filter through for my own classes. Since her and I spoke, I took an online training course, I added a trauma portion to one of my yoga teacher trainings, and I switched my consent cards to be less noticeable by other students. It's important to remember that we teach with the information that we have. We learn new information, and then we teach based on that information. When we take in a new perspective, it is essential to filter the information through your own values, beliefs, and experiences. So if in today's episode you found yourself questioning the way you're teaching, or questioning why trauma-sensitive training wasn't part of your 200-hour, or questioning anything at all, know that this is a really good thing. Be gentle with yourself and the teachers in your community. We don't have all of the answers as a new yoga teacher. As an experienced yoga teacher, I know I won't ever have all the answers. We can strive to question, learn, and grow. Margaret brought so much to that learning today. All of the show notes and links can be found on our website, theconnectedyogateacher.com. If you really liked this show, please take a moment to leave a review in iTunes. It helps me to make more shows. If you want to continue a discussion or ask questions about this show, join our private Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group. Have a fantastic week, yoga teachers. Stay connected to new ideas, your community, and your practice. Thank you for the yoga sharing work that you do.